Hey everyone, 99% of you watching aren't subscribed. Let's change that. Hit that subscribe button, and at 1,000 subscribers, we'll drop special stories just for you.
They called her a Deathworld girl, like it was a diagnosis. Not loudly, not to her face. But Mara Vale heard it anyway. Kestrin Station was a cathedral of glass and alloy, suspended in the velvet seam between coalition territories. Its corridors curved in gentle arcs, gravity set to a diplomatic third standard, so the majority of member species could move without strain. The air was filtered, ion-balanced, faintly perfumed with citrus antiseptic. It felt like walking inside a polite apology. Mara had been born under a sky that tried to crush you back into the soil. 1.3 standard gravity. Storm systems that could peel bark from ironwood trees. Fauna with redundant organs and defensive spikes. On her world, even the grass cut you if you leaned wrong. Here, she had to remember not to walk so hard. The first week at the Coalition Academy, she cracked a composite floor tile by accident. By the second week, she learned to soften her step. By the third, she learned to soften her face. The Academy trained future officers for a 1,000-species alliance, tacticians, diplomats, peacekeepers. It preached unity through shared discipline, mixed-species squads, cross-environment simulations, cultural exchange rotations. It did not quite know what to do with someone like her. During zero-gravity maneuvering, she overcompensated and sent herself spinning into a cluster of buoyant Varelians. In aquatic modules, she moved too fast and churned the water cloudy for the delicate gill breathers. In tactical debate, her solutions were often described as decisive with a careful tone that meant brutal. Try restraint. Instructor Havoc told her after she disassembled a training drone with her bare hands, while everyone else experimented with electromagnetic pulse settings. Not every problem requires overwhelming force. Mara nodded. She was trying. Ref found her alone in the observation ring that evening. He floated more than walked in low gravity, long limbs adjusting with unconscious grace. His species, the Lethari, had evolved in drifting forest canopies above a gas giant's luminous clouds. Even grounded, he moved like something meant for open air. "You're denting the railing," he said mildly. Mara jerked her hand back. The alloy bar had indeed bowed under her grip. "Sorry." He folded himself into the seat beside her, membrane sleeves whispering softly. Up close, his silver eyes reflected starlight like liquid metal. "You don't have to apologize for existing," he said. "I'm not," she replied. "I'm apologizing for property damage." That earned a soft clicking sound that approximated laughter. They had been assigned as training partners by an algorithm that valued complementary extremes. She suspected it was the Academy's polite way of saying, balance each other out. Reth excelled in simulation strategy. He could hold entire battle maps in his head, predicting movement probabilities with eerie accuracy. But in physical drills, he struggled. His hollow bones and lightweight musculature were optimized for buoyancy and glide, not impact. Mara excelled at impact. On the mat, she had to consciously slow her reactions. During grappling exercises, she focused on leverage instead of strength. The first time she accidentally flipped a Tharn cadet hard enough to crack the practice platform, she considered quitting. Reth hadn't let her. "You adjust," he told her while medical drones fussed over the groaning Tharn. That's what intelligence looks like. Not never making mistakes, correcting them. And if I can't correct fast enough, he met her gaze steadily. "Then I will." It became routine after that. She helped him brace properly before a strike. He recalibrated her stance angles to minimize force. She carried extra mass packs during endurance runs. He talked her through diplomatic theory late into the artificial night cycle. He was the only one who didn't flinch when she caught a falling weight, rack one-handed. The attack began on a rotation that was supposed to be simple. Cadets were running a simulated boarding defense scenario in Docking Ring C. The enemy, drones were programmed for unpredictable vectors but limited lethality. Instructors observed from an overhead control booth. Mara had just pinned Ref lightly to the deck, demonstrating an escape reversal when the deck shuddered, not the hollow vibration of simulation thrusters. A deeper impact. Metal stressed beyond tolerance. The overhead lights flickered. A second tremor followed. Closer. Instructor Havek's voice crackled over comms. All units hold position. This is likely a... The far bulkhead exploded inward. Not cleanly. Not surgically. It ruptured. A boarding pod, scorched and jagged, punched through alloy and composite like it was tissue. Atmosphere screamed past Mara's ears before emergency seals snapped into place. The drones powering down midair was the first sign this wasn't a drill. The figures stepping through the smoke were the second. Matte black armor. Visors blank and reflective. Movements synchronized without visible signals. Karthik raiders. They were supposed to be fringe opportunists, disorganized, territorial scavengers who harassed supply routes at the edges of coalition space. These moved like professionals. Cadets defensive formation. Havek barked from the booth. Too late. Shock nets fired from the raiders' forearm rigs, expanding mid-flight. A trio of cadets went down in a tangle of crackling filaments. One raider swung the butt of a rifle into a Kelter's cranial ridge with precise force, enough to stun, not kill. Controlled, measured. Mara felt something cold settle behind her ribs. This wasn't chaos. It was choreography. A raider lunged for Reth. Mara moved without thinking. She intercepted the raider mid-stride, slamming into armored mass hard enough to dent plating. The impact, even in reduced gravity, drove him sideways into a support pillar. She wrenched the rifle from his grip and crushed the barrel with both hands. Another raider struck her from behind with a shock baton. Pain flared, sharp and electric, but she pivoted and drove her elbow into the attacker's visor. The opaque surface spiderwebbed. "Stand down," one of them shouted through external speakers. Compliance ensures survival. Mara answered by sweeping a raider's legs and driving him face first into the deck. Across the bay, she saw Reth struggling in the grasp of one of the larger attackers. His limbs flailed awkwardly against reinforced armor. "Mara," he shouted, "don't escalate." Escalate? They had torn open a station hull. Two more raiders converged on her. One fired a stun lance. She caught the first shot on her shoulder and kept moving. The second hit at the base of her neck. Her muscles locked instantly. The world fractured into white noise. She collapsed, fingers gouging shallow furrows into the deck plating as she fell. Through narrowing vision, she saw raiders securing cadets with efficient brutality. No unnecessary blows. No wild firing. A demonstration. One of them activated an external speaker near her head. "Observe." A filtered voice said calmly, likely for the Academy's recording systems. "Coalition defenses are porous. Your expansion invites consequence." They were sending a message. Reth was forced to his knees beside her. Even stunned, she saw the fear in his silver eyes. Not for himself. For her. "Don't," he whispered again. A raider hauled him upright. Mara tried to move. Her body did not respond. She memorized everything instead. Armor seams, insignia etchings, the cadence of their speech, the faint whine in the boarding pod's left thruster. If she couldn't fight, she would remember. The raiders herded 12 cadets toward the rupture hull section, where another sealed corridor had extended from their dock craft. Instructors pounded uselessly against security glass above, locked out of the system by a hack that had unfolded in less than 30 seconds. Professional. Planned. As Reth was dragged past her, his hand brushed hers. A deliberate touch. Then he was gone into smoke and shadow. The raiders withdrew as quickly as they had arrived. The boarding pod detached. Emergency bulkheads slammed into place. 17 minutes from breach to departure. When paralysis finally ebbed and Mara forced air back into her lungs, docking rings see looked like a crime scene frozen mid-breath. 11 cadets restrained. One missing. Reth. Around her, med teams rushed in. Instructors shouted into comms. Someone tried to help her sit up. She shrugged them off and stood. In low gravity, her weight meant nothing. Inside her chest, though, gravity had just tripled. The raiders kept Reth for 3 days. On Kestrin Station, time stretched thin and metallic. Coalition Command locked down all outgoing traffic. Diplomatic channels flared to life in carefully worded outrage. Analysts projected response trees across hollowables, sanctions, counter-raids, strategic restraint. Mara sat in the infirmary and watched the door. She had been cleared medically within hours of the attack. The stun lance had overloaded peripheral nerves, but done no lasting damage. Remarkable resilience, the medtech had muttered, scanning her dense bone structure with something close to fascination. Resilience? It felt like another word for weapon. The other returned cadets were housed 2 levels below. 11 of them, bruised, concussed, shaken, alive, 1 missing. Ref. On the second day, the raiders transmitted their terms. The message was routed to every major coalition node simultaneously. Impossible to suppress, impossible to spin. The Carthage commander appeared on screen in matte black armor, visor retracted this time. His features were angular, skin marked with ritual scarring along the jawline. Coalition expansion into the Dathry's belt constitutes encroachment, he said evenly. Your mining platforms disrupt established Carthage routes. You will withdraw and recognize territorial sovereignty. Behind him, barely visible in the edge of frame, stood a figure suspended in a grav restraint field, long-limbed, silver-eyed. Ref, he was upright but too still. You have one of our cadets, the coalition ambassador replied, voice controlled. You have our patience, the commander said. Exchange will occur upon confirmation of withdrawal. Refusal will demonstrate the cost of ignoring us. The feed ended. Mara had been in the observation gallery, fingers digging crescents into the metal railing as the message replayed in slow-motion analysis. They weren't frantic pirates. They were negotiating from leverage, and Ref was at leverage. On the third day, the courier pod arrived. It entered Kestrin's perimeter broadcasting a simple handshake code. No weapon signature. No life support beyond minimal. Security teams sealed docking ring B before it attached. Mara was not authorized to be there. She went anyway. The pod was small, barely larger than a cargo crate. Its hull was scored from atmospheric entry it had never experienced. Symbolic damage. Theater. When the hatch hissed open, cold air spilled out. Inside, Ref lay strapped to a restraint board. Alive. Mara knew that before the med scanners confirmed it. But alive was not the same as whole. His gliding membranes, the delicate, translucent structures that extended from wrist to hip, had been torn, not sliced cleanly. Ripped, the edges were jagged, cauterized in places where bleeding had been allowed to start before being stopped. His left forearm bent at an angle it should not. Hollow bones, designed for buoyancy, had been fractured in deliberate spirals. Damage that would heal crooked under standard gravity. Damage that would make gliding impossible. His silver eyes tracked the ceiling as medics leaned over him. He did not look surprised. Mara stepped forward before anyone could stop her. A security officer caught her arm. Stand back. She shook him off without meaning to. He stumbled 2 paces. Let her through. A medic snapped. His vitals are spiking. She moved to Ref's side. Up close, she could see the micro-tremors in his fingers. Shock. Pain management limits reached. Controlled trauma. They had known exactly how much to inflict without killing him. His gaze shifted. Found her. For a moment. The tremor stopped. Mara, he breathed. His voice sounded thin, like wind through damaged leaves. I'm here, she said. She did not trust herself to say more. They said, he swallowed, throat working against dryness. They said Deathworlders only understand loss. The words were soft, but they detonated inside her. What did they do? She asked, though she could see it. He tried to flex his hand. A medic gently restrained him. They were careful, he whispered. They researched us. They knew membrane tissue doesn't regenerate cleanly. They knew hollow bone fractures under torsion won't ever regain full tensile strength. A pause. They wanted you to see. Mara's jaw tightened. Around them, medtechs worked with efficient urgency, stabilizing fractures, initiating regrowth matrices, administering anti-shock compounds calibrated for Ledhari biochemistry. One of the surgeons glanced at Mara. We can save his life. Functionality, a hesitation. We'll do what we can. Reth's eyes fluttered. They told me, he murmured, drifting toward sedation, that if the Coalition refuses their terms, next time they won't measure. His fingers twitched against a restraint board, searching. Mara placed her hand carefully over his. Even in low gravity, she felt how fragile his bones were beneath skin. They said you'd come, he added faintly. The medtech injected a stabilizer. His eyes began to unfocus. Mara, he whispered again, almost gone now. Don't. She leaned closer. I will, she said. He was unconscious before he could answer. The Coalition convened an emergency session within the hour. Withdrawal from the Dathries belt would destabilize trade agreements with 3 member species. Military retaliation risked escalation along the entire frontier. Intelligence divisions argued the raiders had likely fortified additional positions. The term proportional response was used 27 times. Mara watched from the back of the chamber, uninvited. On the central display, projections spun in neat geometric patterns. Fleet movements, resource flows, diplomatic fallout probabilities. Not one of them accounted for the angle of Reth's broken arm. Emotional reaction cannot dictate policy, one delegate said. This is precisely why we must avoid validating their narrative, said another. They want us to lash out. Mara felt something cold and precise begin to assemble inside her. Not rage. Rage was messy. This was clarity. They had not killed him. They had calculated. They had researched Lethari anatomy, understood membrane fiber density, studied hollow bone stress tolerances, applied damage in ways that would permanently reduce his mobility but preserve survival, a message carved into living tissue. The Coalition intended to respond with paperwork. That night, she returned to the infirmary. Reth floated within a controlled grav field, fractures aligned by external braces. Bioluminescent healing gel shimmered across torn membranes like frost. He looked smaller. The low gravity that once suited him now seemed like mockery. She sat beside him in silence. When he stirred hours later, the station lights dimmed to simulate night cycle. You shouldn't look at me like that, he murmured. Like what? Like I'm something broken. Her hands clenched in her lap. You are not broken. My glide is gone, he said quietly. Even if the membranes scar over, I'll never catch thermals again. They made sure of that. She didn't know what to say. On his world, gliding wasn't sport. It was birthright. They wanted you angry, he continued, eyes closing briefly. They said your kind solves everything with force, that the Coalition hides behind you when convenient. And what do you think? She asked. He opened his eyes again. I think, he said carefully, that if you go after them, you prove they were right. Silence settled between them. Machines hummed softly. Outside the viewport, stars drifted in indifferent brilliance. They hurt you, she said. Yes. They did it to send a message. Yes. And you want me to let that message stand. He watched her for a long moment. I want you to be more than what they expect. That was the problem. On her world, Predator survived by exceeding expectations. She rose slowly. Rest, she said. Mara. She paused at the doorway. Don't become the thing they're afraid of. Her voice, when she answered, was steady. They're not afraid. She stepped into the corridor, the door sealing shut behind her. They're testing fences. By morning, she had filed her resignation from the academy. The commandant requested a meeting. You are acting from trauma, he said, hands folded behind his back. That makes you predictable. Good, she replied. He studied her. The Coalition will resolve this through appropriate channels. Will you? She asked. A flicker of irritation crossed his features. You are a cadet. Not anymore. She placed her academy insignia on his desk. I was trained to defend Coalition citizens, she said. You decided not to. That is not. You're negotiating territory, she cut in quietly. They negotiated with Bone. The commandant exhaled slowly. If you act independently, you jeopardize delicate diplomacy. Mara met his gaze without blinking. Diplomacy already failed. She turned and walked out. No one tried very hard to stop her. In her quarters, she packed lightly. Standard issue field kit, a portable grav modulator, a data slate loaded with every frame of the Raiders' broadcast. She replayed again, isolating background noise, mapping insignia patterns, analyzing the commander's speech cadence. Precision. They had used it on Ref. She would return the courtesy. Before leaving, she went back to the infirmary one last time. Ref was asleep. Carefully, so carefully, she touched the edge of one bandage membrane. "I won't be what they expect," she murmured. Then she straightened. "I'll be worse." And she left Kestrin Station without telling anyone where she was going. The Coalition called it a fringe zone. Charts rendered it in soft amber gradients, low governance density, elevated piracy probability, limited strategic value. Mara called it what it was. Unwatched, she crossed into the Dathry's belt in a second-hand cargo hauler with patched plating and falsified transponder codes purchased from a station that didn't ask names. The ship smelled faintly of coolant and old spices. Its artificial gravity fluctuated by a tolerable margin. She turned it off entirely. For 3 days, she drifted cold. No drive plume. No active scans. Life support dialed to minimum. She anchored herself in the cockpit with a harness and let the stars wheel slowly across the canopy. Patience was the first lesson every predator on her world learned. The creatures that lunged at every rustle starved. The ones that waited ate. She replayed the Raiders' broadcast frame by frame on her slate. Not the commander's speech. She muted that. She studied the background. Bulkhead seams. Light temperature. The faint harmonic vibration beneath the audio track. Barely perceptible, but consistent. Industrial-grade gravity stabilizers produced a specific resonance under load. She'd grown up around mining rigs. She knew the sound of mass being forced into obedience. The Raiders weren't hiding in an asteroid. They were anchored somewhere that required constant stabilization. A fractured moon. It took her 6 weeks to narrow the field. 6 weeks of trading cargo under false credentials. 6 weeks of listening in dockside bars where mercenaries compared contracts. 6 weeks of mapping supply routes that dipped into nowhere and came back lighter. She found it by accident, or what would look like accident to anyone watching. A munitions freighter altered course abruptly after receiving a tight beam transmission. It cut across a debris field no sane navigator would enter without guidance. Mara followed at a distance, engines whispering at the lowest possible output. The debris field wasn't random. It was a curtain. Beyond it hung a broken moon, its surface split by ancient impact fractures. Faint energy signatures shimmered along one hemisphere, shielding arrays disguised as geological noise. She smiled for the first time in weeks. "Found you." She did not attack immediately. That would have been rage. Instead, she watched. The moon rotated on a slow axis. Cargo shuttles arrived in staggered intervals, never more than one at a time. External patrols were minimal. The debris field and sensor scrambling did most of the work. Confident. Inside, thermal readings suggested approximately 40 life signs clustered in structured zones. Barracks. Armory. Command. She counted 37 distinct heat signatures over 3 standard days. Deathworld mathematics began with subtraction. 37. She had one portable grav modulator capable of amplifying local gravity within a confined area. Salvaged mining equipment, not military grade. Unstable if overclocked. Perfect. She docked under the guise of a freelance mechanic, responding to a falsified maintenance request she had injected into their comm queue. No one expects a threat to knock politely. The docking clamps engaged with metallic thud. A raider in matte black armor met her at the airlock, visor down. "You're late," he said through external speakers. "Traffic," she replied, pitching her voice lower, neutral. She wore a hooded tech jacket, grease smeared convincingly across her hands. He scanned her quickly. The 4 credentials pinged green. "Stabilizer fluctuation in Sector 3, he said. "Fix it. Don't wander." Wouldn't dream of it. Inside, the base smelled of recycled air and ionized metal. Gravity held at standard coalition norm. For them. She kept her breathing slow as she walked the corridors. She mapped exits. Counted door seals, noted weapon racks mounted at regular intervals. Professional, disciplined, not monsters. That almost made it worse. Sector 3 housed one of the primary gravity stabilizers, massive ring structures embedded in reinforced chambers, humming softly as they compensated for the moon's irregular mass distribution. She knelt beside a control panel and opened it with steady hands. On her world, gravity was not something you adjusted. It was something you endured. Here it was a dial. She connected her portable modulator to the stabilizer's auxiliary port and began rewriting its tolerance thresholds. Not a shutdown, a surge, gradual at first, subtle enough to avoid triggering immediate alarms. When she finished, she stood, wiped her hands on her jacket, and walked calmly back toward the docking ring. Halfway there, she triggered the first phase. The lights flickered. A murmur rippled through the corridor as gravity ticked upward by a fraction. 0.4 standard. 0.6. Raiders adjusted unconsciously, posture shifting, steps growing heavier. An alert chimed over internal comms. Stabilizer variance detected. Sector 3 report. Mara turned the corner. On it, she called, mimicking the board cadence of a contractor. Then she triggered Phase 2. Gravity spiked to 1.2 standard. The effect was immediate. One raider stumbled, catching himself against a bulkhead. Another cursed as equipment straps bit into shoulders unaccustomed to the load. Her body registered the change like a memory. Muscles aligned. Spine settled. Breath deepened. Home. Alarms began to wail. Sabotage, someone shouted. She dropped the hood. Let them see her face. Recognition flared in mirrored visors. Deathworlder. She moved. At 1.5 standard gravity, their armor weighed significantly more. Joints designed for agility under controlled conditions now dragged fractions of seconds behind intent. Fractions were enough. The first raider lunged for his rifle. Mara closed the distance before he could bring it level. She drove her shoulder into his chest plate. The impact, amplified by increased gravity, hurled him backward into a wall hard enough to crater composite. She disarmed in midfall and used the butt of the rifle to shatter another visor. She did not linger. Movement, precision, economy. Deathworld mathematics was not about fury. It was about efficiency. She avoided killing when she could. A shattered knee here, a dislocated shoulder there, under rising gravity. Pain compliance required less force. Phase 3, 2.0 standard. The base groaned. Now the raiders struggled to stand. Breathing became labor. Armor felt like coffins filled with sand. Mara moved through them like a tectonic shift. A shot grazed her thigh. She ignored it. Another raider managed to fire a stun pulse. It clipped her ribs, her vision sparked, but she stayed upright. They had trained for combat. They had not trained for this. She reached the central operations chamber as bulkheads attempted to seal automatically. She jammed her forearm into the narrowing gap and forced the doors apart with a snarl of metal. Inside, the gravity remained stable, an isolated bubble field protecting command infrastructure. The Cartha commander stood at its center, visor retracted. "Calm. You," he said, as if greeting a scheduled appointment. Mara stepped across the threshold. The moment she crossed into the stabilization field, she accessed control node at her wrist and overloaded the emitter. The bubble flickered. Collapse. Gravity slammed down at 2.3 standard. The commander dropped to one knee, gauntlet hand bracing against the deck. "You prove our assessment," he said through clenched teeth. "Predictable escalation." "You tore my friend apart," she replied. "He was a vector. We required leverage." He reached for a sidearm. Even slowed by gravity, he was fast. Not fast enough. She kicked the weapon aside and seized his wrist, twisting until servos and armor screamed. On her world, predators ended fights quickly. Lingering was wasteful. He struck her with his free hand. The blow glanced off her jaw, splitting skin. She tightened her grip. "Your message," she said, voice low and steady, was received. With a sharp, brutal motion, she brought her elbow down against the joint of his armored arm, an angle no joint should bend. There was a crack, metal and bone together. He shouted once. She did not shout at all. What she did next was not rage. It was arithmetic. When she stepped out of the operations chamber, the surviving raiders saw what she carried. Their commander's arm, severed at the shoulder, still encased in matte black armor marked with rank etchings. Blood darkened the seams. She walked through the docking bay as gravity held heavy around them. No one fired. No one could lift a weapon steadily enough to try. She opened a channel on all internal frequencies. "You targeted cadets," she said. Her voice carried clearly through the strained air. "You researched anatomy. You calculated permanent damage without fatality." She dropped the armored arm at her feet. The sound it made against the deck was small. "This is precision." She keyed the control at her wrist. Gravity eased, slowly, mercifully, back toward standard, not to zero. She wanted them to feel the relief. She vented their primary weapon stockpile into space before departing. Explosive decompression, swallowing rifles and munitions alike into the void. Life support she left intact. Food stores untouched. Survivors breathing. As her cargo hauler disengaged from the fractured moon, she transmitted one final message on open band. "Heard a trainee again," she said calmly, "and I won't adjust the gravity back down." Then she cut engines and vanished into the debris field. Behind her, on a broken moon suddenly very aware of weight, 36 raiders began telling a new story about Deathworlders. This one was accurate. Kestrin Station detected her before she crossed the perimeter buoys. The cargo hauler's transponder pinged outdated registry codes and a maintenance signature that no longer matches Hull, Massachusetts. Dock control flagged it for inspection. Security teams mobilized our procedure, not panic. Mara requested docking clearance in a voice stripped of inflection. "State purpose," Dock control replied. "Personal delivery," she said. A pause. "Docking ring A3. You will be met." "I know," she answered. They were waiting when the hatch opened. Armed security in formation. 2 medtechs on standby. The commandant at the center. Posture rigid. Expression carved from policy. Gravity held at the station's standard third. It felt like walking on the surface of a bubble. Mara stepped down the ramp alone. Grease streaked her sleeves. Dried blood, hers and not hers, darkened the cuff of her jacket. A sealed composite container rested in her hands. No one spoke until she reached the edge of the security cordon. "You left without authorization," the commandant said evenly. "You entered a contested zone. You engage an armed faction independently." "Yes," she replied. His gaze flicked to the container. "What have you done?" Mara set it gently on the polished deck. For a heartbeat. The docking ring was silent except for the low hum of station life support and the distant murmur of civilian traffic beyond sealed bulkheads. She keyed the container open. The lid lifted with a soft hydraulic sigh. Inside, cushioned in sterile wrap, lay the armored arm. Matte black, rank etchings unmistakable. The severed shoulder joint sealed in hardened med foam to prevent decomposition. A ripple moved through the assembled officers. One of the younger security personnel swallowed audibly. The commandant did not look away. "You have escalated this conflict," he said. "No," Mara answered. "I ended it." "That remains to be seen." She met his eyes. "It won't." News traveled faster than official channels could contain it. By the time she was escorted, formally, not forcibly, to a secure briefing chamber, half the station had heard some version of the story. The Deathworld girl had returned, not with a fleet, with proof. Inside the chamber, a semicircle of coalition representatives watched her through a transparent barrier rated for riot containment. It was subtle, but she noticed. She noticed everything now. "You assaulted a sovereign faction leader," one delegate began. "They assaulted cadets," Mara replied. "You acted without mandate. You hesitated with one." A flicker of irritation crossed more than one face. The commandant stepped forward. "Report," he said curtly. So she did, not theatrically, not angrily. She described the fractured moon, the debris curtain, the stabilizer architecture, the number of personnel present, the weapons cache location, now gone. When she reached the gravity surge, one of the engineers leaned forward. You increased localized gravity beyond their adaptation threshold? Yes. To what level? 2.3 standard at peak. A murmur. At that magnitude, musculoskeletal strain becomes incapacitating for species evolved under one standard or less, she finished. She did not mention how it felt like breathing clean air again. And the commander? The commandant asked. He attempted lethal force, she said. I remove his ability to command in the field. A careful phrasing. You maimed him. I calibrated, she corrected. Silence. Finally, the ambassador who had spoken during the original broadcast folded her hands. Why bring this back? She asked quietly, nodding toward the arm visible through the chamber's side viewport. Because symbols matter, Mara said. They use your friend as one. Yes. And this is yours? Mara considered that. No, she said at last. This is theirs. Reth requested to see her before the session concluded. The commandant hesitated only a moment before allowing it. They met in the infirmary again. He was upright this time, supported by a grav chair that compensated gently for stress on his fractures. External braces lined his left arm. Regrowth matrices shimmered faintly along the torn edges of his membranes. He looked thinner, but his eyes were clear. You're trending across 3 major coalition networks, he said softly as she entered. The headlines are dramatic. I didn't read them. I did. A faint smile ghosted across his mouth. They're calling you the arm of Kestrin. She huffed a quiet breath that might have been a laugh. How are you? She asked. Alive. He flexed the fingers of his uninjured hand. In pain. Angry. A pause. Grateful. She moved closer, but stopped short of the bed. I told you not to go, he said. Yes. You went anyway. Yes. He studied her face. The healing cut along her jaw, the exhaustion she wasn't quite hiding. Did you kill him? He asked. No. Relief flickered there. I broke him, she continued. In a way he'll remember. Reth closed his eyes briefly. They'll say you proved them right, he murmured. That Deathworlders answer diplomacy with violence. Maybe, she said, but they won't touch another cadet. You can't know that. I can, she replied. He opened his eyes again, searching her expression. What did you see there? He asked. She considered lying. Didn't. People, she said. Disciplined. Structured. Not monsters. That makes it harder. Yes. He was quiet for a long moment. My glide is gone, he said finally. Not accusing. Just stating. She nodded. I know. They calculated that precisely. Yes. And you? I calculated too. His gaze sharpened. You scare them now. Good. He studied her as if seeing a new configuration of something familiar. You scare me, he admitted. The words landed heavier than any gravity surge. Mara stepped forward then, slowly, giving him time to withdraw if he wanted to. He didn't. She took his uninjured hand in both of hers, careful, so careful, of pressure. I didn't do this because I enjoy hurting people, she said quietly. I did it because they needed to understand cost. You think they do? Yes. Outside the infirmary viewport, a patrol cruiser detached from the station and accelerated toward the outer systems. Not to attack, to observe. Intelligence reports were already coming in. The fractured moon had gone dark. Raider traffic patterns shifted away from coalition training routes. Intercepted communications referenced the gravity incident with something that translated roughly to caution. Predator's testing fences had found one reinforced. Back in the briefing chamber, debate continued. Sanctions, messaging strategy, plausible deniability. Mara knew her future at the academy was finished. Perhaps her future within formal coalition structures entirely. The commandant entered the infirmary later, alone. You have complicated matters, he said without preamble. Yes. The raiders had withdrawn from 3 contested corridors. She said nothing. They are spreading a narrative, he continued, that coalition cadets are protected by monsters. Mara tilted her head slightly. Are we? He held her gaze. After a moment, something almost like reluctant respect settled into his expression. You forced a recalibration, he said. Yes. He glanced at Reth's braces, the shimmer of healing gel. There will be consequences, he added. I assume so. A beat. But, he finished, there will also be adjustments. When he left, Reth looked at her sidelong. You just change how they see your entire species. She exhaled slowly. They already saw us as weapons. And now, she said, they see we choose where to aim. Silence settled, not heavy this time. Measured, beyond the station's glass. Stars burned with indifferent brilliance. Trade lanes glimmered. Patrol routes shifted subtly outward. Mara remained beside Reth until the artificial lights dimmed for rest cycle. She did not feel triumphant. She did not feel righteous. She felt the weight of what she had done and the balance of what she had prevented. On a broken moon far away, a commander learned to navigate the world one arm short. On Kestrin Station, cadets returned to training modules with reinforced security and new protocols. And in quiet corners of Coalition space, a story began to circulate. Hurt, one of theirs. And gravity answers back.